Welcome to the Support Automation Show, a podcast by Capacity. Join us for conversations with leaders in customer or employee support who are using technology to answer questions, automate processes, and build innovative solutions to any business challenge. I'm your host, Justin Schmidt. David, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Thank you for coming on the Support Automation Show. Where's this podcast find you?
I'm in San Francisco, and thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So you recently joined Zingtree as their CRO. Why don't you start by telling us a little bit about yourself and your journey to Zingtree, and then ultimately a little bit about Zingtree and what it does?
With pleasure. So a little bit about myself. I'm French-American. The first half of my career, or a little bit less than half, I actually was a mechanical engineer and designed buildings, specifically like green buildings, which was fun. But after an MBA, I switched into tech, and I've had the good fortune of joining two like hypergrowth startups. First in Typeform, where I stayed for about 5 years. I was employee number 15 there, and built out the sales, customer success, support, education, lifecycle marketing, and operations teams. And then moved to San Francisco with Typeform, and then was kind of poached by Notion when they were very early stage. I was employee 13 there, and also responsible for building out sales and customer success, not support in that case. And I was at Notion for just about 2 years before joining Zingtree, which happened under a month ago, so it's still very new. So Zingtree is a decision tree software tool where it's very horizontal. You can use it for any type of decision. But it's true that we are focusing on the support area, and specifically around kind of agent scripting and knowledge-based / self-help solutions for customers. Mm-hmm. And my role as CRO, I'm responsible for sales, marketing, customer success, and support.
Very cool. Thank you. So here on the Support Automation Show, we like to start with the question of, when you hear support automation, what does that mean to you?
My mind explodes in all the possibilities that it could be. I think a lot of things that people talk about, and that like I was definitely very interested in exploring when I was running support at Typeform several years ago, was the whole like AI, ML aspect of support automation. Mm-hmm. My impression at the time and still today is that that's still kind of in its infancy, and there's a lot of people who spend a lot of money there, but a lot of implementations may or may not actually be working as well as people hoped. Mm-hmm. And so now with Zingtree, my view is a little bit biased, but I think what's most effective these days in support automation is automating or enhancing the performance, boosting the performance of the agents, the support agents, be it on calls, chat, or email. And that's kind of what I'm think about investing in when I'm thinking about support automation.
Right. And that's ultimately with the advent and proliferation of automation in knowledge work, or for those on audio only, I'm making scare quotes, white collar work. The augmentation is really the big driver here, less so replacement, right?
Exactly.
There's a freeing people up to sort of do their best work and to be able to do the higher order tasks that humans are capable of is the type of thing that you need to sort of clear the runway to have that happen. And when people are bogged down with repetitive tasks and all that, it doesn't happen. Yeah. So buried in my little spiel there is this notion that sometimes people find automation scary. And have you dealt with, in the change management throughout your careers, with growth and scale and having to sort of bring automation in, and now as someone working on sort of like bringing automation to other firms, have you come across any situations where you've learned how to manage the expectations of that fear to get to drive adoption and keep people from being sort of quote unquote afraid of automation?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point. And anytime there's an initiative like that, I think the first thing to tell the team, because ultimately, you do a POC or you experiment with the team, or you do your research, is hey, our intention is not to let anybody go. Like, nobody's losing their job here. We just want to be even more effective in like making the team more effective, and also ultimately it creates a better experience for our customers. If we become better at first resolution time, if we're able to solve more calls on the first interaction, customers will be a lot happier than if they have to escalation and deal with many different people. If we're able to respond to tickets faster or to calls faster, people will be happier. So I think framing it in that way and what our ultimate goal is takes a lot of the fear away.
Right. It's interesting. The anecdote I always tell on this, I had a customer support experience rather with Best Buy not too long ago, where it was a very esoteric issue. Like, it's an extremely esoteric issue. And it is one of those times where the company and the business is large and is sort of sophisticated as Best Buy, they do a lot to sort of deflect my phone call ever happening in the first place. The fact that I had to call and I couldn't get triaged by their voice assistant or whatever, and I actually had to get to a person, because the issue was esoteric, and I had to get to an agent to actually speak. I ended up having a really pleasant conversation with this woman while we were going back and forth on everything. And it was just a good piece of human interaction. And in a world where the person on the other end of the phone, where she has to like constantly answer the same question a million times over and over again, or do, mindless things like look up RMA numbers or whatever it is, you don't have the bandwidth for that human connection. So in addition to making people just more effective and efficient, you also get this benefit where like the space is a little more cleared to do what we humans do best, and that's connect and converse. So I'm 100% with you there.
It can also be part of the automation can also be just directing the right customer to the right person in the first instance, rather than having them deal with a few people who either aren't qualified or don't have the answer to that question. So to your point, I totally agree with that.
Yeah. One thing that is particularly interesting about your career path, David, is two things. And I would love to unpack this with you a little bit, because people in support, whether it's in the customer support / success role, or if it's internal and like a employee experience, there's effectively support and success agents too. You've had the good fortune to experience scale twice now, which is awesome. And I would love to just explore this with you a little bit and speak to some of the things that, you maybe were able to replicate at Notion based on your experience at Typeform, or maybe wish you would have known prior to sort of like taking the rocket ship to the scale that businesses like Typeform and Notion have enjoyed. Would just love to kind of speak to like some of the things you learned about automation and scale in support, and if you could sort of like go back in time to before you joined Typeform, would have told yourself.
There's so many learnings because like many people, I've made so many mistakes along the way. So I've certainly learned a ton. I think one of the big things I learned about scale is A, focus, and B, like focus on what. And so I think it's really important, A, to be focused, and B, to be focused on the right things. And when I say the right things, one of the issues I had that I lost sleep over probably for years, certainly for months, was the churn rate at Typeform. Our monthly churn rate was very high by the certain benchmarks that we used, which was like for SaaS. But SaaS in general includes like enterprise and SMB. So already if you break it down between enterprise and SMB, I would have lost a little bit less sleep. And then furthermore, the use case is very different, right? Like even if Intercom is selling to SMBs, Intercom is a tool that you're kind of using all the time. Typeform is more like a one-off use case that you can create a survey, get a ton of value out of it, but then you're done until you have your next survey, or maybe you're even done forever. Right. And so ultimately, like several years into my role at Typeform, I came across the retention rates of SurveyMonkey, which was our biggest competitor.
Yep.
And kind of one of the companies we looked up to, and realized that our retention rates were significantly better than theirs. And actually, we're doing a great job. So that was one thing. And I think, relaying that to support, support is often considered a cost center, which I'd love to talk more about. Like,
yes.
I don't like to think about it exclusively that way, but we're always looking at, cost per ticket, cost per dollar of ARR, stuff like that. And I think when we limit ourselves to only thinking about it that way, we miss the opportunities of all the other value of having a support team, which is not only making our customers happier, but also learning from our customers. And I think that in the early days, it's good to track those ratios and our efficiency, but we should be okay with a lower efficiency, because our goal in the early days is not to, make every dollar, optimize the bang for the buck, but rather optimize the learning so that we are growing in a more thoughtful, strategic way.
Yeah, that's great stuff there. Because support isn't a cost center, right? It's unfairly, things like HR, support, IT, these things are sort of like labeled cost center. It's like the revenue organization or sales and marketing, those drive the revenue. Everything else sort of supports that. But that's not true. Is there any advice you would give to someone in a success or support role to help make the case that function is actually a revenue driver and not just a cost center?
Absolutely. The first thing, so I actually wrote a blog post that was coincidentally published today, but it's about the ROI of a CSM, and it's published in the Startup Grind. But so I have two stories about that. The main thing is nobody can realistically calculate the ROI of a customer success team or a customer support team. And there's a few reasons for that. One is it's impossible to know what the actual baseline would be without those teams. If we removed support, how would that impact our business? Well, that's not even a question. Like we need to have support. Okay, but then how does incrementally each support agent increase that value, or that compared to that baseline of not having a support team? And the other one is there's a lot of additional value beyond just helping a customer solve their problem with a support or a success team. You also get more positive word of mouth. You get less negative reviews. You can offer premium support and make that additional value on your higher tier plans, which makes it easier to sell higher tier plans. And there's a number of others. I won't, you can go to my blog post if you want to hear all of my thoughts.
We'll link in the show notes.
Yeah. So my point is that I think like thinking about calculating a hard ROI number, like it's a little bit easier to do in a sales perspective, but doing that for sales, for customer success or support is not the right way to think about it. And the other thing that, so the more kind of tactical or tangible story is from my days at Typeform. We had a great data team back then that helped me with this. And we were debating whether or not to continue supporting our free users. So Typeform is a freemium business. Something like 96% of our users never paid. So only a small percentage paid. And of our support tickets, roughly 2/3 were from free users, 1/3 from paying customers. We know we need to support our paying customers, but 2/3 of our costs were supporting free users that were that weren't paying us at the time. So what we did is we did an analysis of how much does a support interaction increase the conversion rate from free to paid of those free users. And we found that a free user that interacted with our support team was about 5 times more likely to convert than someone who hadn't contacted our support team, or had contacted our support team but just not received a response within a reasonable period of time. And then we were able to calculate, and I won't bore you with all the details, but roughly that the ROI of our support team supporting those free users was above 2 to 1. And therefore it made sense to us financially, and obviously we also know that for our brand, there's a lot of value in anybody, because Typeform grew mostly through word of mouth and virality. Just anybody, including free users, getting access to support was also valuable to us. So
that's really interesting. One of the, one thing you hear occasionally if you're listening to growth hacking or entrepreneur podcasts, it's like the value of doing a cohort analysis on your customers. Like one of the common things is like AppSumo, pick on them for a little bit. Like you might get a big cohort of customers from some, lifetime for $5 or whatever deal that you had on there. And you end up having this like very expensive to support cohort that sort of, as time goes on, maybe creates a burden on smaller number but higher dollar value future cohorts. But what you just touched on was something that I always kind of wanted to hear on a podcast whenever people talk about that, which is like, no, like actually do the analysis on it and see if there is conversion opportunity to with that large sort of like thick cohort, if you will. One of the sayings that old boss of mine back in my media days always used to say is that the clicks are the spice, right? To use a Dune reference, clicks are the spice. If you got the clicks, you can start to do other things, right? And
I played Dune. I hear you.
Yeah, trailer dropped today. It looks great for the movie. But yeah, when you have users, you can get data from those users. You can experiment with different conversion programs or whatever to move those users further down the life cycle or into higher dollar value engagements or whatever it is. And it's great to hear that y'all were able to sort of leverage that into something versus just saying like, these are customers and these are good brand advocates, but they're shackles around the ankles on this company. Let's just, stop supporting them or whatever. So very, very interesting stuff.
Thanks. Yeah. I think, and what was also interesting is, around that time we started ramping up the sales team, because for a while we didn't have a sales team at Typeform. And when we dug into those support tickets that free users submitted before they upgraded, they were absolutely not sales conversations. They were people coming in trying to figure out if Typeform could solve their problems. And it was very much a support type interaction, not a sales type interaction. And so a lot of companies will have, a chat bot on their website or whatever, and it's more like the sales team mans that rather than the support team. And so that was another interesting observation from that whole experiment.
Yeah, very cool. So when we're thinking about bringing automation into organization, there's a lot of options out there in the marketplace. There's a lot of different approaches to whatever business case you have that you're looking at automating. If you could give any piece of advice to a business leader who's looking at purchasing some sort of platform to bring automation into their function, what would it be?
Yeah. I think it should start with what problem are you trying to solve? Because depending on the problem, you'll have different solutions. And some solutions include outsourcing. It doesn't have to be software. It can be like offshore, whatever. But so I think that's the first thing. Are you trying to solve the problem of you have a huge turnover in your support team and you have a big problem ramping people? Are you trying to solve the problem of compliance? You see that like some of your support agents, I recently read this blog post, which is based on a book about decision making. And it says that problem with decisions are either that they're biased. So the same agent will always be making kind of the same mistake. That's a bias towards making that mistake, or that there's noise in that depending on which agent you speak with and what time of day, and like if it's before or after lunch or whatever, you're going to get a different type of response, and it's scattered as opposed to biased. And so what is the problem that you're trying to solve with your team? And based on that, you can find the right solution. But we'll start with the problem.
Yeah, I like that. It reminds me of something that has come up a couple times doing this show, and it bears repeating. not only do you have to identify, like, you really be comfortable and understand what problem it is that you need to solve, but you also really need to understand the process you have in place in the first place. Like, one of the things that, we try to do, and I'm sure, Zingtree's in the business of this. I'm actually kind of very curious to hear how you guys approach this too, is like, map out the process in the first place. And like, you may find that there's just good old fashioned like job design or org chart structure or just good old fashioned process management that like you don't necessarily even need technology to solve. You just need to like, go back in time and just sort of like rebuild the thing in the first place. And you might find a lot of benefit to that.
Yeah, do you just need a good ops person, or do you actually need software? And I think,
exactly.
It's the story I really like. A great problem that one of our customers at Zingtree solved with our tool is SpaceX, where their problem was they have all these brilliant, literally rocket scientists designing rockets, and they have this like hundreds of pages of code of how you're supposed to build spaceships in the space, written by NASA or something like that they have to follow. And they can't expect every engineer to know the code by heart or to like find the right place to search. And maybe they would make errors when they're searching, et cetera. And what they wanted to build was the TurboTax to the tax code of of this code. And so that's where they used a decision tree software that thankfully they chose Zingtree. And and so a little bit of self-promotion. But so their engineers now, when they are looking for what the regulation is for something, they can follow an automated decision tree that their compliance people built, and they've saved thousands of hours just from that. And that's a very clear problem of it takes a ton of time to read all these complicated regulations, and you can imagine the same thing at Typeform and Notion and Zingtree. We the first approach to the product is very simple, but as you get deeper into it, there's certain areas that go really deep, and you can't expect every support agent to know how to solve all of those problems. What you can do is give them a decision tree that helps them get to it. Again, as an example of shameless self-promotion. I'll stop there.
No, that you're more than welcome to self-promote. So David, this has been a fantastic conversation. I think some of the stuff we've talked about today is I'm certain is going to spark the imaginations and minds of people listening here in ways they can either things they need, like if someone does a cohort analysis on their free users inside their application and figures out a way to optimize those into a sort of higher value user base, then we've done our work for the day. Excellent conversation. I really appreciate you coming on. We're going to end with our quickfire round, famous 5, Fab 4. I haven't branded this yet. We'll get there, but just let's end on some quick ones here. What's the book you most often recommend to people?
It's a book called High Output Management by Andy Groves. I literally just recommended it yesterday. So
I read it. Yeah, it's a fantastic one.
Yeah, as I became a manager and then a manager of managers, it's really what helped me navigate that. So love that.
Yeah, that is a all-time classic. What is the best productivity hack or productivity practice that you've implemented for yourself? So
I use Notion for everything. I'm a little bit biased from having worked there, and I agree. And in there, I have a way to organize my days that I really like. So I have like the way I organize my to-do list. I have my like ad hoc list of things that just come up periodically, and like I have a place to put them, so I don't have to organize them as they come up. I can just put them there. For the week, I have a Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and I have a column I have these columns, and I have one for next week, and where I put my tasks for next week, and then at the beginning of each week, I drag the tasks into each day. And then I have, and then lower down on the page, I have tasks that I want to do sometime. And then I have the point is that I really like organizing my week that way, because I make sure that I don't drag more than 2 or 3 items for each day. It allows me to kind of plan my week and to block off time on my calendar if I need to do things. And since I have that system, I just feel a little bit more productive than I was before. So
It's very interesting. It reminds me somewhat of the Eisenhower matrix. I don't know if you've ever looked at that, where you have like stuff you have to do, stuff you can delegate, stuff you can put off, and stuff you can just
exactly important versus urgent.
Yeah, exactly.
Before that, I always had a to-do list, but having it those days, what I used to do is just drag 2 or 3 things every day. But then sometimes I wouldn't plan far enough ahead, and I feel like that week ahead is a good. Anyway.
No, I love it. I love it. That's a really good one. Do you?
Thanks.
You should have that. That might be another blog post for the startup grind. If
well, I do advise a few companies, and I've given that presentation a few times of like how I like my productivity model.
Yeah. Very cool. Very cool.
Yeah.
If you could recommend one site, blog, Slack community, LinkedIn group, etc., for someone in the support space, what would it be?
So the companies that seem to create great blog content, I don't actually follow any blog, but I gravitate often to the same places. Mm-hmm. I think Gainsight. Yeah,
Gainsight's got a great one.
Thought leader in this space.
They do a great job.
Generally love their content. And I think Zapier is great, and Intercom would be kind of my top 3 for learning how startups operate.
Yeah,
and the last 2 are learning how startups operate. The first one is more like thought leadership and customer success.
Yep, totally agree. If there's one person in the world of support or even revenue teams, let's say in the revenue team organization, if there's one person in the revenue org world that you could take out for coffee or cocktails, depending on the time of day and vibe, who would it be?
I guess if I could only choose one, the leader I admire the most is Nick Mehta, the CEO of Gainsight. I admire him both because I happen to know a lot of people at Gainsight, and they all speak very highly of him, like extremely consistently. And what I love about his leadership style, which he shows even when he's speaking publicly at his events, like the Pulse events, is he's very vulnerable. Like he's not what and I think a lot of people dislike about Silicon Valley arrogance. He's like the opposite of that, and I hope that I follow in his footsteps, and I hope a lot of other leaders become more like him. So,
that's great.
So yeah,
that's great.
And I've had the pleasure of meeting him, but yeah, I'd take him out again.
Yeah, that's really important. One of the things it's a little anecdote. We had a bit of a fire drill at the website this week, and one of the things that I kept telling myself the whole time was like, humility. This is the buck stops with me. This is my fault. Like, the team is doing their best, right? Like, you get really far in this world by not being a jerk, right? So it's great when people, who lead businesses as successful and as big as something like a Gainsight still have that humility and sort of like, goodness about them. That's fantastic. Yeah. So David, thank you very much for joining us. Where can people find you if they want to learn more about you or Zingtree?
I'm on LinkedIn under my name, David Apple, and same on Twitter. I have to admit I'm a little bit less on social media now that I'm a dad as of 14 months ago. I think I'm prioritizing the right things. But
you are.
Please follow or reach out to me in either of those channels. I love this type of conversation. Thanks again for having me. And
it's my pleasure. Thank you. The Support Automation Show is brought to you by Capacity. Visit capacity.com to find everything you need for automating support and business processes in one powerful platform. You can find the show by searching for Support Automation in your favorite podcast app. Please subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. On behalf of the team here at Capacity, thanks for listening.